Having heard, I was due to make my argument first in this session, having heard the case put for the two largest political parties, or the established political parties, by Frank and Mary. I'm going to have to leave my original argument aside and condense some of it and deal, I think, with what I think is some of the delusion left in the mainstream view of Irish politics. Imagine, each bill would have to be negotiated with the TDs. Wouldn't that be incredible? Loosening the whip would threaten parliamentary democracy. Well, parliamentary democracy hasn't been functioning properly in this country for 20 years. It might be worth a try. Far from sparing the rod of late, we've been choking the child of parliamentary democracy with the whip. But anyway, before I get into that, I want to thank Joe for putting the programme again together for this week, for inviting us to be part of it. The programme itself reflects the volatility and diversity in our party political system. You have the current leader of Fine Gael, I see, coming on Friday. You have the next leader of Fine Gael coming on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on whether you see it as Leo or Francis. You have the current leader of the Labour Party. I see the next leader of the Labour Party cancelled out of the water charges session tomorrow night. You may have already heard from the next leader of Fianna Fáil. You have the current leader of Fianna Fáil at some night later in the week. You have the leader of Renua coming. You were to have 2/3 of the leader of the Social Democrat, but now that Stephen Donnelly is cancelled, you have only 1/3 with Catherine Murphy on Friday. I am coming across from the airport yesterday afternoon. I hit on what I thought is an amazing phenomenon. Kevin Byrne was giving me a lift across in the taxi, and we came to roadworks, and they had these red and green traffic lights to allow each traffic from each side to stop. But on the bottom of it, it had this clock counting down the 121 seconds of the 2 minutes it was going to take before we got to go on our side. It's like that, in 5 seconds you can skip the ad on YouTube or on the walkway. And I kind of felt that's what we need now about this election. We need a bit of patience. Before we rush on to consider what the scenarios are, what the parties are, what the outcomes are, we should first focus on what the election is about. We should first focus on what the content and nature of the election debate is. Give me that 2-minute countdown to focus on some of what I think the answers might be to the type of question that Joe was asking. When is the election? My guess is Thursday the 10th of March 2016 or Friday the 11th of March 2016. 90% of me thinks that way. The other half of me is not so sure. But since you've troubled to come out here at 11 o'clock on a Monday morning in July, I suspect you're the type of people who would be interested in booking off that weekend, and on that Saturday myself and Frank and Mary for periods will entertain you looking at the election results as they come in on the Friday or the Saturday, depending on when that happens. That's the first thing. These are only guesses, and it's all they can be is guesses. Second guess is that the next government will be Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. I said that here a year ago. Little has changed across the published polling the last year to change me in that view. That's what the bookies are saying. The pundits' view of it is informed by the current state of polling and can only be informed by the current state of polling, with some allowances for what might happen. They will, they may, Mary hasn't, protest too much perhaps that they won't go into government together. But if that's what the numbers are after the election for a workable majority, if that's the only workable majority that's available, perhaps with a couple of independents after the next election, then that government will happen. And if it doesn't happen, the electorate won't thank them for it. The electorate certainly won't thank them if they come back at the doors a few weeks or months later because they haven't managed to put that working and stable government together. Year on year, the only significant movement in the polls, from the point we talked here last year, is some improvement in the Fine Gael position. That improvement arises from the recovery. The recovery is spreading. I appreciate the sense in Donegal that it mightn't have got here intensely yet, but it is spreading, and the sense that it be sustained is spreading. The one achievement this government can carry forward is jobs recovery. And if you carry jobs recovery, then that's a significant political asset. That is accruing to the benefit of Fine Gael in giving them some element of a recovery. It's in part because this country is going to continue to recover and grow across the next 8 months that, as I've written, Enda Kenny would be insane to go for an election before next spring, because the more of that he has under his belt, the better it would accrue to Fine Gael. Interestingly, on the flight up yesterday, having missed some radio during the week, I listened back to his interview with Sean O'Rourke, and when people were talking about the fact that this government mightn't be re-elected, he said, all the pundits were wrong about what happened in Britain and the government was re-elected there. No, it wasn't. The government wasn't re-elected in Britain. The Liberals were destroyed in Britain. And that looks on the polls what's going to happen here to the Labour Party. When that question of uncertainty or otherwise arose in Britain, it was the Conservatives who became the principal beneficiaries. And there's something of that pattern kicking in now for Fine Gael. The poll shifts in the last year make the prospect of a Fine Gael Labour with others government more likely, but the Fianna Gael Fianna Fáil option is still, in my view, the most likely. The bottom line is the independents and smaller parties and micro-parties and left-wing groupings, far-left groupings, have wasted the opportunity. A year ago, there was a window open, a golden opportunity for some coordinated entity on that side to say, we want to put together an alternative government. They've wasted it. They couldn't agree it. They couldn't coordinate it. It's now too late. They couldn't, in a sense, cooperate to the extent of organising some kind of general platform that would be available to the electorate as an alternative government. On the far left, they're interested only in competing with each other, literally on the streets at times, and certainly in the ballot boxes. In the centre and middle, the independents and smaller parties are now fighting for which one of them is going to make up the numbers after the next election for the establishment parties, rather than actually having the ambition the electorate have for them, which is that they should and would have been the central part of an offering of an alternative government. They should be saying, let's do politics differently. And for those who believe in a more progressive and transparent politics, for those who believe in real and substantial political and economic reform, and for those who thought this crisis would end up in a genuinely transformed society, that represents a lost opportunity. Because as you've already seen this morning, the establishment parties have reverted to type. We have very quickly in this country moved from the politics of recession to the politics of recovery in a shorter period of time than we expected would happen. And that has meant we've had very little debate about that recovery, what it should be for. It's not just about, of course it's important to have jobs recovery and to sustain it and keep it, but it's not just the economy, stupid. It's not just recovery. Why this crisis if no changed society after it? Before I studied law, my passion was and still is history and politics. If you, many of you do, if you're gathered here, enjoy history and politics, you'll know that in the English language, the political and historical biographies you most come across are those of Churchill and Kennedy. And I've had a passion for the readings about Churchill and Kennedy all my life. They're colourful, interesting, Kennedy's case telegenic, in Churchill's case the classic parliamentarian of his era. They are men who could think big thoughts and say great words. But actually it's in reading the political lives of those two men that you come across two much more interesting men who actually achieved an awful lot more. Lyndon Johnson achieved an awful lot more than Ted Kennedy did. Those 100 days of the Great Society's legislative programme for the transformation of poverty, tackling of poverty in America and civil rights, much more significant presidency than Kennedy had. He managed it in part because he leveraged the crisis and trauma of the Kennedy assassination to really move, to transform and change American society. Why have we had none of that from this crisis? Where's the new thinking? Where's the real and substantial political change? Where's the societal transformation that shows we've learnt the lessons and it will not happen again? I remember about 5 years ago having a July silly season radio debate with Miles Dungan, on Miles Dungan's programme, with Fintan O'Toole, who had said, "Where's Ireland's Winston Churchill?" And I think I kind of blindsided him, because I came and said, Ireland doesn't need a Winston Churchill. Because frankly, what people forget is Winston Churchill was bluffing during the Second World War. All he wanted to do was keep Britain alive long enough until the Americans were provoked in to come in and win the war against Nazism. He knew the British couldn't. I said, what Ireland needs is a Clement Attlee. There's a man who transformed a society. There's a man who, with his colleagues, wrote the policies to transform a society in the middle of a crisis. The Beveridge Report, written in 1942, the NHS memo brought by Cabinet, the Beveridge Report 42 and the NHS memo brought by Cabinet by Bevan in 1945. During the war, the decision was made enough would be enough. The society, the politics post-war would not be the same as that pre-war. We would never get ourselves back to that situation again. And in so doing, the Labour Party recognised, while it's playing its part in tackling the crisis, the British Labour Party recognised the fact that the mood had changed. The public had enough, that the men fighting in the trenches, or although not in the trenches, but in the Second World War, but the men fighting in a sense to the front line of the war were going to come back and expect and demand and vote for a society that was different. Churchill didn't, and it took a period for the Labour vision that became, in a sense, the modernisation of society, at least for 50 or 60 years, to be implemented. Where has that happened in Irish politics? Where are we at the end of this crisis? There's some disconnect, and the disconnect is touched on in part by Mary when she talks about social media and others. The generational disconnect. There's a massive generational disconnect. The under-30s in this country are massively disengaged from our mainstream politics. They have no interest in the prime times or the to's and fro's of party and party leader competitions. We had assumed wrongly that they weren't interested in politics or political issues. And as somebody who gave 2 months of after-court time to the marriage equality campaign, I can tell you they are massively interested in real issues of fairness, in real issues of equality, in real issues of the organisation of our society. And if they are going to stay engaged in our politics up at least until next spring, then they're going to deliver one hell of a new, stronger message. Incoherent perhaps, but new, stronger message to the established political parties. You see, it is in the interest of the established political parties to say 8 or 9 months back from the election that it's a choice. It's a blunt choice, folks, between sustaining the economic recovery with political stability or undermining it with political chaos. There's something in that, but there's a middle course. And that middle course is to say, let's take the next few months and have a real conversation, not about Ireland in 2016, but in Ireland in 2021, and after that. Because the Ireland in 2021 is going to be shaped by the government that elected and the policies that it's emphasised in 2016, or in and around the election. I wrote a book in advance of the 2007 election called Showtime or Substance, in part because I was concerned that too much of the election coverage in this country, even then, had become about the horse race dimension. Who's up, who's down, what the polls are not, who's going to win in this constituency. And I'm conscious that I've contributed to a lot of that myself. But it took the time then, in a sense, to look at the various issues and policies that might emerge. The book was published in January of 2007, and I wrote wrongly in the book that taxation policy would not be a big issue in the election because tax rates were so low. 3 weeks after the book was published at a party conference, Pat Rabbitte promised to cut the bottom standard tax rate by 2%. He was followed by Enda Kenny and followed by Bertie Ahern at his Ardèche afterwards with 2% and a whole range of public spending gimmicks as well at the height of 2007. We are now sleepwalking back into auction politics. We have moved from the recession to the recovery, and rather than offer a detailed, comprehensive change that shows the lessons of the recession have learned or the crisis have been learned, what do government and opposition parties do? They do what they're used to. They try to find that sector of the electorate that can be best bought off by tax cuts or specific expenditure. The answer needs to be more sophisticated than that. The answer needs to be more complex than that. It'll be harder to have that debate because there's no clear binary choice about government in this election. But the onus has to be on everybody. And politics has changed in its breadth and dimension. Civic society and NGOs and online forums and community groups and social groups and academic and policy experts and those of us in the media and those gathered here. In other words, we have to say, well, if politics won't have this debate, then we'll have to force them into that space. And we'll have to begin to put it up to them as to what those other issues, rather than just the economic recovery are. There's every reason why this will be a recovery election. But there's no reason why it shouldn't also be an equality election, why it shouldn't also be the children's election, why it can't be the carers' election, why we can't finally solve some of the big central social injustices in this society. If we're to learn anything from the crisis, it has to be that.